background tunes. This took place over a span of approximately 3 to 4 years during my childhood. I can't pinpoint exactly when it all began, but I started to experience this repeating, semi-lucid nightmare every few months or so. As far as I can recall, it happened something like this. I would be laying down in my bed, but the scene wasn't from my own point of view. Instead, it was like I was observing myself from above, from a spot on the ceiling, as if I was watching my own bedroom through a surveillance camera. The disembodied experience always gave me the chills. I attempted to float or glide towards myself, but I was only capable of rotating my head to survey the room. I was semi-conscious, so I was aware it was a dream, but that didn't ease my fear. Once I managed to calm myself down, I would start to note odd things about my bedroom. For instance, the digital timepiece on my bedside table would consistently read in reverse. That was usually the first peculiar detail I'd spot. And once I picked up on that, I'd start identifying other oddities. There would be these sketches fixed to random areas on the walls and my dresser, the kind of crayon doodles you'd expect from a child my age. But I had no recollection of ever creating them. I wasn't the kind of kid who drew a lot, so it wasn't as if I had merely forgotten about them. They always depicted the same scene, a line of people holding hands, all smiling with one smaller character who I presumed was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof. But I can't recall much else about the sketches. The other aspect of the dream that still resonates with me is an old toy train of mine that was consistently positioned in a different place on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had misplaced that specific toy years ago. Eventually, after examining my room for a while, I'd get this inexplicable impulse to gaze out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if on a signal, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short grey hair and what appeared to be a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can recollect about his appearance. He would observe me sleep for a short moment, then start scratching at the window as if attempting to pry it open from the outside. That's typically when I would wake up. Sometimes I immediately sprinted to the window, and sometimes I was too petrified to even stir, but I always ended up investigating one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd discover. Perhaps scratch marks or a smear where his hand had been, but there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the fourth occurrence, I finally confided in my parents. My mum explained that recurring dreams were not uncommon, especially for someone my age, and my dad chimed in to reassure me that they were always just a room away if I ever felt frightened. I nodded and pretended that it made me feel better, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could see I was still frightened, so he took me by the hand and we inspected the outside of the house together. There was no sign that anyone had been there. There were no footprints, no prints on the window pane, nothing at all. Yet this didn't soothe my anxiety as much as you might assume. Bear in mind, this was a year into the occurrence and I was experiencing this dream roughly on a quarterly basis. It wasn't a nightly event, not even close. However, having the same dream 4 times certainly indicated something, and even at my tender age, I was aware of that. But after the 4th dream, they abruptly ceased, at least for a while. I went almost half a year without a single episode. At some point, I allowed myself to think it was over. The entire situation just seemed to disappear into the backdrop, as childhood fears often do when life starts to normalize. But then it resurfaced. I have no clue what sparked it. But one random evening the dream revisited me. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The clock, the sketches, the train, everything was the same. But there was something about this dream that terrified me even more than the previous ones had. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, since everything followed the same sequence of events. But then, as I scanned the room, I noticed it. My bedroom window was open. The moment I observed that, I jolted awake. For maybe 5 minutes I was immobilized. Total and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive case of sleep paralysis either. My mind was yelling at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't muster the strength to get out of bed despite my efforts. Additionally, I felt considerably colder, as if a cool breeze was entering through my bedroom window, which I was sure was wide open. Those few minutes were filled with a kind of terror I have never felt before. All I could ponder was that the man was about to enter through my window, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it. When I finally regained control over my limbs, I mustered the courage to go to the window, only to confirm that it was locked. I couldn't drift back into sleep that night. The fear was too overwhelming. I'm unsure how I managed to function the next morning. Months passed, but I wasn't going to be deceived again. Each night before sleep, I would contemplate the dream in an effort to prepare myself for its potential recurrence. I wasn't sure if this method was logical, but I hoped that keeping the dream fresh in my mind would help me not to be overtaken by fear, should it happen again. Surprisingly, this technique worked. The next time I had the dream, I was only half as frightened. I didn't even bother checking the window upon awakening. When the dream came again, I was hardly frightened at all. Yet, something about it stuck with me. It wasn't scary, but it intrigued me enough to mention it to my parents again. Maybe it was how I described it, or possibly because I was a bit older. But for some reason they listened more attentively this time. I endeavored to provide as much information as I could, a level of detail I'd never gone into before. As I began describing the man, a subtle change came over my parents. It wasn't a drastic shift, but I noticed it nonetheless. Particularly when I started describing the scar on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my father interjected, questioning the accuracy of my recall of the scar. Assuring him of my certainty, he exchanged a glance with my mother, hinting at a hidden piece of information that I was not privy to. I questioned them about their peculiar behavior, but they dismissed my concerns, assuring me everything was all right. Not wanting to agitate them, I didn't press for more answers. However, from that point onward, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the narrative. Several days later, my parents decided it was time for a conversation. It wasn't a grand revelation. They simply said they had something they needed to share. My mother did most of the explaining. Evidently, when I was quite young, too young to remember, there was a man named Brian who used to look after me. They referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't a relative, just a good friend of my father's from university. He was a constant presence during my infancy and toddler years, particularly when both my parents were occupied with full-time jobs. But something occurred. My father didn't go into specifics, merely mentioning that there was a disagreement severe enough for them to sever all contact. He forbade Brian from ever approaching our family, me in particular. That was the end of the story. I questioned them about the disagreement, but they declined to elaborate, reiterating that it had nothing to do with me, and I had no cause for concern. The only additional information they shared, which left me feeling uneasy, was that Brian had a distinctive scar on his forehead from a car crash that happened years before my birth. They didn't explicitly link the two, but they didn't need to. I was mature enough to draw the connection myself. Later that night, after my mother had retired to bed, my father stayed up with me a little longer. I sensed that he wanted to say more, as if he wasn't entirely content with how the conversation had unfolded earlier. After a brief silence, he shared his theory. He suggested that the dreams might be my mind's attempt at unearthing a deeply buried memory from when I was a toddler, before I was even capable of forming complete sentences. He recounted how close I used to be with Brian, how I'd weep when he left, and would always prefer him to read me to sleep. My father couldn't think of any other explanation for my knowledge of Brian's scar. I didn't know what to think of it all. I had no memory of this man named Brian. Even now, I can't dredge up a single memory involving him. Regardless, I had no option but to continue with my life, recurring dream and all. Another few months went by. I'm striving to recount the sequence of events as precisely as I can, yet it's challenging to recall the exact lapse between each dream. However, I do remember that the dreams became less frequent after discussing them with my parents. During the following year, I experienced the dream only once, perhaps twice. But in the fourth year, a frightening twist occurred. One evening, after waking up from the dream, I looked at my window out of routine, and this time I noticed a movement. It was a brief flicker, but I was absolutely certain something had just moved outside my window. Instantly, the terror I had been attempting to suppress for years came flooding back, even more intense than before. I sprang from my bed and cried out for my parents, who took my panic seriously. My father rushed outside barefoot while my mother comforted me. When my dad returned, he whispered to my mum, and they instructed me to stay put while they contacted the police. I obeyed and stayed in their room, but I don't recall hearing any sirens or other voices that night apart from theirs. My dad assured me that everything was under control and that the police would handle the situation. The following day, he revealed to me that he had noticed what seemed to be very faint footprints beneath my bedroom window. When I asked him if it could be Brian, he said it was impossible since they had relocated and Brian didn't know our new address. My dad guaranteed me that nothing harmful would ever happen, and he was correct. I never experienced that dream again. My parents are reluctant to discuss this event, and I understand why. I have yet to receive a clear explanation from them, but I've given up trying. The unnerving thought that haunts me is the possibility that every time I had that dream, there may have been someone outside my window spying on me. Could it really be that someone had been intermittently stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't make sense, and I'm torn over what's more frightening. Whether it was indeed Brian watching me, or some unknown person that my mind linked with him for some reason, and how this all somehow seeped into my dreams remains a mystery. I've conducted research, but I still don't know how this could have happened. Perhaps he was making a sound that my brain registered. I really can't be certain. What I do strongly believe is that my parents never called the police that night. That's something I may never understand. I will probably never receive any answers about this experience since it's been so long. But if I do, I'll share an update. I'll keep this brief. Most nights I fall asleep to some type of noise. It's the most effective way I've found to drift off quickly. Sometimes it's a chess video, other times it's a space-related podcast, or it could be just the sound of a thunderstorm. You get the picture. I'm the type of person whose dreams are heavily influenced by what I fall asleep to. This means that if I doze off while watching a compilation of rugby matches, there's a good chance I'll dream of playing rugby. This phenomenon turned out to be a blessing, as it helped me avoid the nightmares that used to plague my childhood. A few weeks ago, this came into play during an overnight stay at my friend Duncan's house. It was a sleepover, so there was no specific sleep routine. This didn't bother me. I just knew my dreams would be less controlled. Duncan, myself, and our friend Ian were present. Duncan's parents were out of town for the weekend, which was why we were having the sleepover. We all chose to sleep in the spacious, comfortable couches in his living room. That night, I had one of the most vivid dreams in recent memory. I was on a small sailboat in the middle of the ocean. I've never been on a sailboat before, so it was a mystery where that came from. The sea was extremely rough, and the sky was an eerie blend of dark purple and grey. The wind was strong but not frightening. I felt like I was in a film scene. Suddenly the boat jerked violently. I couldn't see what we crashed into, but I felt the impact. Something cracked underneath, and water began pouring in. I recall trying to block the leak with my jacket, a futile attempt. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Just as the boat began to sink, a dolphin leapt out of the water, looked at me, and said, "Wake up," in flawless English. That immediately brought me back to reality. I'm normally slow to shake off sleep, but this time it was different. I scanned the room for anything unusual, but everything seemed normal. My friends were sleeping, and the living room was just as we left it. You know that strange moment just after waking up when processing information is a bit cloudy. That was what I was going through. A few moments later, my mind started focusing again, and I noticed a strange sound. There was a continuous rushing noise coming from upstairs. It wasn't a faint noise like a leaking tap. It was steady like water flowing from a hose. This probably explained the ocean-themed dream. I sat still for a moment, trying to identify the sound. Then, despite better judgment, I decided to investigate. I tiptoed up the stairs, the noise growing with each step. It was clearly running water, and it was coming from the upstairs bathroom at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and from where I stood I could see the sink. One of the taps was fully turned on. Water was just pouring out at an intense pace. It was impossible for that to happen naturally. It was illogical. As I approached the doorway and was about to step in, something halted me. The upstairs bathroom is quite spacious. It boasts a long counter, a bathtub with a curtain, and an oddly placed toilet, creating many hidden spots. I thought someone might be hiding behind the tub or the door. I felt a chill in my gut. I don't know why, but I was unable to enter. I retraced my steps and hurried down the stairs to rouse Duncan. I shook him vigorously and informed him something was amiss. Initially he was drowsy, but my voice's urgency must have hit home because he sat up and asked what was happening. I explained that the upstairs sink was spurting water, and I suspected there was an intruder. That certainly woke him up. We left Ian slumbering on the couch and cautiously returned upstairs. Duncan did not hesitate when we reached the bathroom door. He pushed it open and went in. I was not ready for what was about to unfold. In a split second, a figure emerged from the corner and assaulted Duncan. It all happened so quickly. All I saw was Duncan falling, and this man brandishing a piece of PVC pipe as if he was about to beat him senseless. I didn't think, I just hurled myself at the man in an attempt to rescue Duncan. We both grappled with him, but he was larger than both of us. It was utter mayhem. Eventually the man escaped, pushing us aside and darting for the stairs. By the time Duncan and I reached the porch, he had disappeared. The police arrived about half an hour later, but they were of little help. They deduced that the intruder had entered through a window on the lower level, which was wide open and had not been locked. Duncan's family didn't have security cameras in their home, so there was no evidence to provide. The police suggested it was probably a burglar committing a random act, but we believe it was much more targeted. Firstly, why would a burglar deliberately create noise by turning on a sink tap? Sure, it was clearly a trap to lure someone upstairs, but if he was there to steal, what was the motive? This led me to believe his intentions were more ominous, something I can't fully comprehend. Duncan is sure the intruder knew his parents were away and was expecting only him to be home that night. If this is true, then the intruder's goal was to gravely harm or even kill Duncan. I shudder to think what would have happened if I had ventured into that bathroom alone. Music. This incident occurred on a Friday night a few months ago. My girlfriend's parents were away on a weekend trip. It was some kind of anniversary celebration, I believe. Of course, my girlfriend Bonnie extended an invitation for me to stay at her house. Her parents are usually quite conservative, and an overnight stay in her room is absolutely forbidden. However, they were going to be out for the entire weekend, so we figured it wouldn't cause any harm. Bonnie resides in one of those suburban residential areas where every house looks identical. It's so peaceful that by 10 p.m. it always seems deserted. To be honest, the place makes me feel uneasy whenever I depart late in the evening. Therefore, the idea of not having to leave late was rather comforting. I arrived around 8, brought some munchies, and we watched a film. Just the usual stuff. Bonnie's room is upstairs, overlooking the backyard. From her window you can just about see the thick row of trees that encloses their property. They lack significant outdoor lighting, so at night it's like staring into darkness itself, comparable to a void. Bonnie's room has a queen-size bed, so there was ample space for the two of us, enough to stretch out without invading each other's space. I'll spare the rest of the trivial details. At around midnight, we decided to switch off the TV and drifted off to sleep. I don't recall falling asleep, but the eerie dream that ensued is still vivid in my mind. Now, before I share it, I'd like to mention that I've only ever experienced a false awakening dream a few times. That night was one of those times. For those unfamiliar, it's an oddly surreal and almost transcendent experience. Dreams like the one I'm about to share are the primary reason I believe there are unseen entities in this world. In the dream, I woke up suddenly to the distinct noise of a door slamming shut somewhere on the lower level. Before I could fully comprehend it, rapid footsteps began charging up the stairs. I abruptly sat up in bed, planning to confront the intruder. Yet, something held me back. Bonnie's room looked exactly the same as it did when we went to sleep. Every detail was in its rightful place, except for one thing. One detail that still etches itself in my memory. A thin yellow light was seeping into the room from the gap beneath the bedroom door. It was just a sliver of light, but for some reason I couldn't divert my eyes from it. With that, my courage dissipated. My sight started narrowing into this small strip of light as everything else began fading into darkness. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and began rushing towards the door. but I was paralyzed. Then there was silence. I was still fixated on the light below the door when the voices started. Initially, it was just one voice, a woman's voice, hurling insults about my appearance, my worldview, my future. But then it started getting intensely personal. It knew things about me, intimate details I'd never divulged to anyone, not even to Bonnie. It began recounting episodes from my past, statements I'd made, actions I'd taken, knowledge only a close acquaintance would have, knowledge impossible for a stranger to possess. One voice multiplied into 2, then 3, rapidly escalating until a chorus of 100 voices were relentlessly hammering me with my deepest, most suppressed secrets. It was as if the darkest corners of my mind were being forcibly extracted and put under intense scrutiny. I couldn't handle it any longer. I flung off the duvet, sprinted across the space and threw open the bedroom door, prepared to face my tormentor. But the moment the door swung open, all the lights in the house abruptly died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The voices ceased, the atmosphere chilled to an icy cold that bit into my skin. For a fleeting moment it felt as though I'd been transported to a different realm. I tripped back in a confused daze until I found the bed, then dove under the covers like a frightened child. Then I awoke, or so I thought. I was still in the throes of the dream. I just didn't realize it. I sat up slowly, still shaken but attempting to reassure myself that the terror was over. To my dismay, when I glanced at the bedroom door, I saw that familiar beam of light seeping into the room. Then I heard it, the jarring sound of the downstairs door slamming shut, followed by the same frantic footsteps rushing up the stairs. The whole sequence replayed with excruciating accuracy, the footsteps halting at the door, the voices, the sequence, everything. I couldn't control myself. I rushed towards the door and flung it open, only to be met with the same chilling darkness as before. When I finally truly woke up, my heart was in overdrive. I was fairly certain I was awake, but the surreal nature of the double false awakening left me disoriented and unsure. Bonnie was peacefully asleep beside me, oblivious to the ordeal I had just endured. That's how I knew I was truly awake. In my dream, I hadn't even thought to check the other side of the bed. I started to calm down, but when I sat up to look at the bedroom door, I almost let out a scream. There, under the door, was that same sliver of light I had seen in my dreams. The exact same scene. It didn't make sense. Bonnie and I were alone, and every single light in the house was supposed to be off. For a moment I just stared, unsure of how to interpret what I was seeing. But then I heard footsteps downstairs, as clear as a bell. Someone was in the house. I immediately recognized we were being burglarized. Without a second thought, I took out my phone and quietly dialed the police. After explaining the situation, I tiptoed over to the door to confirm it was locked. Then I carefully woke Bonnie, placing my hand over her mouth so she wouldn't inadvertently make a sound. She didn't scream or panic when I told her, which was a huge relief. It felt like an eternity, but after a few tense moments, the police arrived at the house. Things got noisy downstairs. The cops truly burst through the front door amidst a wave of loud voices. Once I felt it was safe enough, I ventured downstairs just in time to watch 2 masked individuals being escorted into a police vehicle, handcuffed. I had a brief chat with the officers, expressing my gratitude before heading back upstairs. It was quite late, but Bonnie's parents hurried back from their journey earlier than planned when they learnt about the incident. Surprisingly, they weren't upset that I spent the night. Upon hearing my account of what happened, they were actually relieved. About a week later, Bonnie reached out with additional details. The police had informed her parents that the 2 apprehended men confessed to the break-in, having seen a Facebook update about their vacation and assuming the house would be empty. Strangely enough, dwelling on the break-in itself doesn't particularly unsettle me. What truly sticks in my mind is that eerie dream. I can accept that the sounds of the break-in might have infiltrated my subconscious. That part is okay. What I can't comprehend is the actual substance of the dream. Bonnie suggests that I might have some unresolved issues lurking in the recesses of my mind, a thought I would rather not entertain. As for the door, I was lying down, making it impossible to see the door, let alone form a vivid mental picture of it. I'm at a loss as to what to make of this. But that sliver of light is something I encounter frequently. I can visualize it clearly even now, without needing to close my eyes, which is more disturbing. It's not as though it's impeding my sight, but it's constantly there, lingering in the back of my mind. I'm hopeful that this image will fade eventually, but there's a part of me that fears it might be etched into my memory forever.